Hello YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host Logan Albright. Although this is not actually a book review, this is a book haul, although there will be a little talk about some of the books within it. This video is coming a day late, so I apologize for that. It's been an extremely busy week and I've been traveling a lot. And one of the places I've been traveling to was Providence, Rhode Island. And this is a book haul of books that I acquired while in Providence, Rhode Island. So let's talk about that. Now, Providence is a city that I had passed through many years ago, just for like an evening. And I thought, it seems really cool, but I didn't get the chance to spend any time there. And so I've always wanted for the last 10 years or so to spend some time in Providence and haven't had the chance. Earlier this month, Southwest Airlines sent me an email and they were like, hey, we've got some like really cheap fares to various cities around the country. And I saw that they had like a $50 fare to Providence, and I just randomly decided to spend a weekend up there. So that's what I did. And it's a really cool town. It's got a lot of kind of the spooky New England vibe. It's very nautical. It's got a real colonial feel to it. It's got a little bit of urban decay and some messiness to it too, which a lot of cities have. But the whole package is pretty great. So I recommend Providence, and they have very good seafood up there as well. But one of the things they have, their most famous resident in Providence is H.P. Lovecraft. He is the person that city is really known for. And he's buried there, and his house is there. It's like a historical landmark. And we've talked about H.P. Lovecraft on the channel before. I think he's a fantastic, interesting author. Now, Lovecraft is one of those authors, a lot like Edgar Allan Poe, who I don't really love reading his work that much. I think his stories are good, but I wouldn't count him among my favorites. But what I really love about him is the influence he had on the genre. And Lovecraft's influence is incalculable. And it just like the ideas he had and the people who aped him and copied him and took ideas and ran with them, I think are fantastic. And modern horror, which is my favorite genre, wouldn't be what it is without Lovecraft. And so I have a great appreciation for him. And while I was there, I got to go to visit his grave, and people have left all sorts of cool and spooky artifacts on the grave, which was really neat to see. And they really seem to like him there. And there's a bookstore there called the Lovecraft Arts and Sciences. And it is in a little mall kind of in downtown. And it's a bookstore that specializes in not only his work, but the works of people who influenced him, the works of people who were influenced by him, weird fiction in general, kind of mythology, the occult, all kinds of weird and interesting books. And I can't recommend this bookstore highly enough. I thought it was awesome. I wish there was a bookstore like that in my town. I would go there all the time and buy a lot of stuff. But I didn't have a ton of room with me. I had a small bag only, so I could only get so many books. And I ended up buying 5 books from the Lovecraft Arts and Sciences. If you're in Providence, you should definitely go. But let's go through the books I bought. The first I bought is Aleister Crowley's The Book of Lies. Now, I've talked about Crowley quite a bit on this channel before. I'm a big fan of him. I don't really know much about this book, but it's one of the more easy to find ones available in mainstream bookstores, and it's one that I haven't read yet. I think it's like aphorisms and poetry and weird kind of cryptic, mystic sayings. So I find value in most of what I read by Crowley. I was going to say Lovecraft there. I find his writings on the occult very insightful and very good. I find his fiction a little bit less good, but I always am interested to read what he has to say. So I picked up this. It's one of the ones that I don't have. He's got such an immense bibliography. It's hard to read everything, but it's always good to try because I find his stuff very valuable. The next book I got is by someone who was influential on Lovecraft and someone who I am a big fan of, Lord Dunsany. He was a fantasy writer, and this is called The Pleasures of The Pleasures of a Futurescope. It's a novel that he wrote. It was towards the end of his life. I have a couple of books of short stories by Lord Dunsany. He's a British writer, and he writes these really interesting, fascinating little fantasy miniatures. They're like little jewels of fantasy, and they're remarkable in that they kind of drop you into these strange and imaginary worlds, and you're only there for a few pages, but you get a complete picture of what these worlds are like. And he's so evocative and so creative in his writing. I love his short stories. I've never read any of his novels. This, I think, was published only a few years ago. It was like found in his papers and published posthumously, but it's got a cool cover, and I like his stuff that I've read, so I'm excited to read that novel and see if it's any good. The next book I bought on a whim is called The Fery Te Lambs Head Pocket Guide to Eccentric and Discredited Diseases. This book, I didn't know anything about. I just thought that sounds like a cool book, and I picked it up and thought it looks good. I initially thought it was going to be like an actual history book about the history of medicine and old diseases that are no longer considered to be real diseases, which I would have been quite interested in. It is not that, it turns out. It's sort of a humor book with a bunch of contributing authors. So it's all fictional, but it's written in a very elaborate and eccentric, like late 19th century style, which is a style I appreciate a lot. This includes writings from Neil Gaiman, Michael Moorcock, Alan Moore, and a lot of other kind of famous fantasy writers detailing weird, imaginary, humorous diseases and how they affect you and how you can be cured of them. And it's got a whole kind of fake backstory history of the writer, the purported writer, Fery Te Lambs, which is a great kind of old-timey name. I love old-timey stuff, and this sounded like a lot of fun. So I haven't really delved too deeply into it yet. I just kind of started reading the first entry, and it seems pretty funny and pretty interesting. Next up, I got from Dover Publications. I don't think I've talked too much about Dover Publications on this channel, but I love Dover Publications. Back when I was young, when Borders Books was still in business, I used to go to Borders and just buy Dover books all the time because I think they publish a lot of really interesting stuff. Their books are reasonably high quality and they're very inexpensive for the most part. This is the Poetic Edda, the mythological poems saga from the Icelandic sagas. And I am going to Iceland at the end of October, and I wanted to study up a little bit on some of Icelandic mythology. And I've read the prose Edda before, but I've not read the poetic Edda. So this is one of two volumes. They have the mythological poems and the heroic poems. I decided to go with the mythological ones because I like reading about the gods. And I just think Dover does great stuff. When I was in graduate school in Atlanta, there was a little bookstore. They had always had a display of Dover thrift editions. And Dover thrift editions, they're not, you know, particularly high quality volumes, but they're reprints of classic works of literature for, like, at the time, these were like $3 each, something ridiculously cheap. And I would just go there and buy random stuff that I thought looked interesting. And I discovered a ton of great literature that way. I remember reading Heart of Darkness from that series. I read The Monk by Gregory Lewis from that series, all kinds of great stuff. And I think Dover does fantastic work publishing weird stuff. And they have a great collection of kind of occult and mythological volumes as well. When I was first getting into occultism, I read a lot of stuff from them, and easy to find, you know, available in bookstores kind of stuff. So they're great. And then the last book I bought, I just saw it was by the counter. It was by the cash register, just kind of in this little pile. And I just picked it up on a whim because I had heard of this book, but I didn't know anything about it. And I just thought it sounded cool. And it's Goblin Market and Other Poems by Christina Rossetti. This is the Macmillan Classics edition. I've talked about these before on the channel, these small little blue and gold volumes. I have several of them. I kind of like them. They're a little bit of a weird size, but they're great for just like putting in a pocket and carrying around with you if you want something to read. And this is quite small and quite short. Now, I love goblins. I think goblins are fascinating. I remember reading when I was a young kid, maybe 9 years old, 10 years old, I read a book called Goblins in the Castle by Bruce Coville. And I've never read anything else by Bruce Coville, but I remember reading that as staying up late in my bed and reading that and thinking it was very scary and very enthralling. And I've always loved goblins and found them fascinating. So I thought Goblin Market sounds like a poem for me. And I've heard of this poem. I knew it was very famous, but I never actually read it. And I did read it. I've finished this whole book because it's only, you know, very small and short and easy to get through. So I've already read it. And Goblin Market is fantastic, and it's haunting and it's eerie and it's a little bit resistant to interpretation. It's not quite clear what she's getting at. There's some very strange and kind of erotic imagery in it. This was written in the, I think, 1860s, so it's height of Victorianism and prudishness, but it's very clearly got some erotic intent to it. And what the story is about these two sisters who live together, and they go down to the river to collect water, and they hear the goblins cry, "Come buy our orchard fruits, come buy, come buy." And they're tempted by these fruits. And one sister's like, "No, we must not look at goblin men. We must not buy their fruits. For who knows upon what soil they've fed their hungry, thirsty root." And the other sister's like, "Let's try the fruit." And so the sister tries the fruit, and she becomes obsessed with it. And she says it's the most delicious thing ever. And she can't stop thinking about it. And she's going to go back the following night and get some more of it. But she can't get more of it because the goblins have disappeared and she can't hear them anymore. Her sister can still hear them, but she can't hear them anymore. And she starts to kind of like pine and waste away, and her hair goes prematurely gray, and she's basically just wasting away to nothing because all she can do is think about the fruits, and she can't get them anymore. And her sister has to rescue her. Her sister goes down to the market, and her sister buys the fruit. But the goblins won't let her buy it and take it away. They want to feed it to her because they want the same thing to happen to her. But she resists them. She keeps her mouth clamped closed, and the goblins smear the fruit all over her face, and she gets covered in sticky juice Again, sort of erotic imagery. And she goes back to her sister. Her sister licks the juice off of her and is cured. And it talks about then like they become nice, good wives and have families, and it's all fine. It's beautifully evocative poetry. The meter and the rhyme scheme are very irregular throughout. And at first I thought this was a weakness of the poem. I was like, what is this author doing? The meter and the rhyme are all over the place. But I think it works really well in hindsight. And it's a poem I can't really stop thinking about. And I keep going back and reading sections of it again because it's really spooky and weird. And there's a lot of potential allegorical interpretations you could take of the poem. Personally, I think it's sort of about chastity and the resistance of temptation, and these Victorian girls, the ones who fall into temptation and hedonism, they end up going old and gray and becoming old maids and not getting married or having families. And it's up to their more pious sisters to kind of bring them back into the fold. That's kind of what I think it's about, but it's very unclear. And it's just I like poems like that where you can kind of read lots of different meanings into them. And I thought it was great. There's a lot of other poetry in this volume as well. Goblin Market is by far the longest, but there's some devotional poems and there's a lot of other poems. Christina Rossetti seems sort of preoccupied with melancholy and death, and there's a lot of talk about lost love and all that kind of stuff. She seems like a fairly unhappy person. Some of the other poems are quite good, but I would say only a handful. A lot of them I found sort of mediocre, but there's a handful that are really powerful and good as well. The devotional poetry didn't do much for me. But for the Goblin Market alone, which is quite long, I think this is certainly worth the asking price because it's a poem I'm going to think about a lot, and I think I'm going to reread a lot. It's really just stuck with me. So those are the books I bought in Providence, Rhode Island. Again, if you're in the area, can't recommend the Lovecraft Arts and Sciences bookstore enough. It's really, really cool. They have great sections on everything that I'm interested in, from fairy tales and folklore to weird fiction to histories to mythologies to occultism. And they also have like role-playing games, and there's art, and they actually sold some LPs and stuff as well, some weird music, which I would have bought except for I don't have a turntable and I didn't have room to carry an LP back with me in my luggage. Because I like weird music, which we've talked about before. But that's what I've got going on. And then I have to get going because I'm going camping this weekend out in the woods. So that should be a lot of fun. But I'll be back next week with another book review for your viewing pleasure. So thanks so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright. If you enjoyed this book haul video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, leave me comments down below, and check back every week for yet more talk about books, music, movies, and other things that I like to talk about. Thanks again. I've been Logan Albright. Catch you next time.